Right, grade 12. As I mentioned in some of the classes, I am not going to be teaching the growth and development strategies of chapter 9 in class. I am going to send you a video for each of these strategies. Then you can work through it on your own because this is straight theory that simply has to be studied. There's nothing to understand here. All right, so the first strategy that was implemented in 1994 was the Reconstruction and Development Program. Obviously, you need to know what the RDP stands for, Reconstruction and Development Program. All right, so the RDP was basically an anti-poverty strategy. Obviously, when the ANC took over in 1994, they inherited an economy that came out of a period in time where there was a lot of sanctions and boycotts, and South Africa was excluded from the international markets. And because of discrimination and apartheid, there was a huge amount of poverty under previously disadvantaged people. So they decided to adapt the RDP to eradicate the consequences of apartheid by basically making sure that all people's basic needs were satisfied. So the main aim of the RDP was to reduce the poverty. Okay, the 6 principles that the RDP was based on. First of all, it was an integrated, coordinated, and sustainable program. Coordinated in the sense that all government departments had to move towards the same goal, and sustainable means ongoing. All right, so it wasn't a once-off strategy doing something once off. It was a process of continuing to do what they did. Okay, continuously applying things, doing things that will decrease poverty. Right, it was a people-driven process because the focus was on economic development, really, more than economic development. When they want to decrease poverty, obviously that will increase the living standards of people. So it was a people-driven process. The focus was more on increasing living standards than what it was on economic growth. Okay, there was a national drive for peace and security for all. Obviously, the transition into a democracy was done peacefully. And the idea was that by providing security for all, and by security we mean food security, shelter, basic needs being satisfied. Everybody's basic needs being satisfied. Encourage the need for nation building. It is in 1994 that the notion of a rainbow nation came to the fore. The idea was that as a nation we would stand together and that everybody would be equal and we would work together to get a better South Africa. They wanted to link development and growth and reconstruction, redistribution and reconciliation so that people's basic needs could be met. So obviously the focus was on economic growth and development, reconstructing the economy so that it would benefit everybody and not just some, redistribution to reduce the poverty, and reconciliation, which means like peaceful transition. We had a peaceful transition. We reconciliate the past with the future. And then lastly, implementing democratization by involving people to participate in decision making. Obviously, in 1994, we had our first 100% democratic elections. So the idea was that going forward, every citizen would have a say in the decision making in the country, obviously by exercising their vote. Okay, the key five key programs of the RDP. This is obviously something that you need to remember. First of all is meeting basic needs. As I said, it's a basic needs strategy. So the whole idea behind the RDP was to satisfy people's basic needs. So obviously the first one would be meeting people's basic needs. All right, and the focus there was on job creation. Okay, through the Public Works program. We have mentioned Public Works in class when we did chapter 11. And then we also are going to do this later on this chapter. There's a whole section on the Public Works program. Land reform obviously was focused on giving people access to land, people that didn't have access before, people having access to housing, water and sanitation, which are seen as basic needs. Okay, everybody should have shelter, they should have access to clean water and proper sanitation. And they expanded the energy and electrification network. Okay, so more people would have access to electricity, telecommunications, transport, a clean and healthy environment, nutrition and healthcare, social security, and social welfare. Obviously, nutrition and healthcare definitely also falls under basic needs. People need to have their basic needs satisfied. One of those needs are actually to eat. Right, social security and social welfare, that refers to the social grant system, which was expanded significantly. More and more people was added every single year ever since the RDP was introduced. The second key program is developing the human resources. Okay, obviously the focus here is on education and training. If people are educated, if they receive training, that means they have qualifications. It is easier for them to find jobs. And when people have a job, they can earn an income, which they can then use to satisfy their basic needs. All right. So the focus here is on all educational institutions, whether it's primary school, secondary school, or tertiary institutions, and then training at workplaces and civil societies for all ages. All right, so this is not only referring to a school education and becoming qualified, it is also about providing skills training for people at work, at work skills training. While people are working, they can expand their skills and gain more skills while they are earning an income. Okay, the focus is on all ages. As I said, it also includes adult education. So people wanting to get that matric certificate, even if they're older, for that to be possible. Right, very much focusing also on arts and culture. There's a lot of people that have skills and talents in this area, and people can make a career of that. So the focus is on enabling people to use their skills to create an income for themselves. Right, sports and recreation, and then youth development. Building the economy, obviously the focus here is economic growth. Building the economy means economic growth. Okay, so what they tried to do was to identify and remove the factors that was inhibiting the economy, that was preventing the economy from reaching the economic growth levels that they aimed at. Okay, it was promoting industry, trade, and commerce. Okay, so industrial development. We will look at that in detail in the next chapter. Resource-based industries, like our agriculture and mining, to upgrade infrastructure. Okay, and infrastructure, you will see it pops up in almost all of the strategies because a country's infrastructure needs to work properly so that the economy can be run efficiently. Infrastructure enables us to get the labor to work on time, to get raw materials to the factory on time, enables us to communicate with our consumers, enables us to advertise our products, it enables us to get the finished goods to the market from where it will be distributed. So infrastructure makes the economy more efficient, and we need to remove the backlogs in infrastructure so that the economy can grow. Right, reform the financial sector, and then very important to address labor and worker rights. After 1994, there's quite a number of legislation that has been passed to look after your worker rights, like the Labor Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, to make sure that workers are treated fairly at work and that they receive fair remuneration. All right, the next program there, key focus area, was democratizing the state and society. Okay, the idea was to create an accountable and transparent government where they are accountable to their taxpayers and they explain to us what they are doing with the tax money, why they do what they are doing. All right, so they are accountable, they're transparent, they don't hide information from the citizens so that obviously the citizens can vote based on the information that they have at their disposal. If processes are not transparent, people are going to vote not knowing what they are really voting for. The idea is that it would be transparent and that people will then look at what information that is there so that they can make the correct decisions. All right, implementing the RDP, that involved building the government's capacity, okay, so expanding the government's capacity, creating ways to coordinate activities between different departments and levels of government so that all levels of government and all departments of government moves in the same direction. All right, so they also looked at the planning, the frameworks, and the financing of the RDP. Obviously, the money for expansion of infrastructure, the money for social grants, the money for education and training, it has to come from somewhere. So obviously, it involves also the budgeting process. How in the budget are they going to finance these programs of the RDP so that they could reach their goals? The aims of the RDP, okay, obviously the government has certain goals. So this will link in with the government goals. The first one, to create new and sustainable jobs. Obviously, one of the aims or the goals of the government is to have full employment or to reduce unemployment. So the plan was to use the RDP to create new and sustainable jobs. Obviously, I've mentioned many cases already that it was to alleviate poverty, a basic needs strategy, so that they could alleviate poverty, they could address low wages in certain of industries, and they could redistribute wealth and wages, because you can only alleviate poverty by giving people access to a decent income. They wanted to address economic imbalances and structural problems in the economy, whereby you will see that there's some regions, some areas in the country that is more developed than others, and structural hindrances, supply constraints that is there, that is preventing the economy from operating properly and creating the growth that is needed. So the idea was to find where those imbalances are and to remove those constraints. As I mentioned before, when the ANC took over in 1994, as a result of apartheid, we were coming out of a time where we were excluded from the world economy because of sanctions and boycotts. So we were not participating in the world economy. We could not export, we could not import, we did not trade with other countries. So our industries became very, very isolated. So the idea was also after 1994 to integrate our industries back into the world economy, obviously by increasing our domestic capacity, making our local industries more competitive, so that we could also increase our exports again and use the injections that come as a result of exports to develop the country even more. Okay, they wanted to address the uneven development within regions. As I said, there's a huge disparity in our country between certain areas being highly developed and very much wealthier than other areas of the country that still use outdated technology and that are not as developed. There's not as many jobs available, lots of people living in poverty. The idea is that we create a more even development between the different regions of South Africa, and then also between South Africa and the other countries of Southern Africa. Very important. The idea was that nobody would ever suffer discrimination again on the basis of race or gender. Obviously, with the end of apartheid, they wanted the discrimination to stop. That's why lots of legislation was also passed to support this aim. To develop the human resource capacity. Human resource refers to our workforce. Okay, obviously, this is done to improve their capacity. We need to get them educated. We need to provide training, because trained workers, educated workers are more productive than untrained workers, and they are able to earn higher salaries so that basic needs can be satisfied. And then lastly, democratize the economy and empower the historically oppressed. As I said, obviously, after 1994, we wanted everybody, all citizens over 18, to be able to participate in the decision-making process through the process of voting for the government that gets to run the country. If we then look at the success and the failures of the RDP in terms of its achievement, on the positive side, the RDP emphasized both demand and supply sides of the economy. Remember, we keep saying that you cannot stimulate the demand side without also removing the supply constraints, because otherwise you are going to create yourself some inflation. Right. So what the government did was, in meeting basic needs, in making sure that there was a redistribution of income, the government created an increased demand for goods and services, which then could lead to an increase in production for as long as what supply could increase. Then the production of goods and services, the public works program specifically, was very labor intensive. So it did help to alleviate unemployment and poverty to a certain degree, because it did create some jobs. Obviously, I wouldn't say that it was hugely successful, because the unemployment rate didn't go down and stay down. They did create jobs for some people, and obviously to those people it made a huge difference. But the unemployment rate of the country wasn't really getting lower. The biggest achievement of the RDP is the social achievement. The houses that was built as a result of the RDP, we still, even years, more than 20 years after the RDP was cancelled, we still refer to the low-cost housing that the government builds for the poor people and hand over for free. We still call it RDP houses. All right, that was a direct result of the RDP. It was the key focus area of the RDP, remember to provide basic needs, and housing is basic needs. So everybody that could not qualify for a home loan, people that did not have money to buy their own houses, the government would build a very, very basic low-cost housing structure, which they would then hand over for free out of the tax money to people that qualified to receive a house. They also provided clean water and sanitation to more people. They expanded the networks. Same with electricity. They started the land reform process. Land redistribution and restitution was started as a result of the RDP as well, so that people can have access to land, because land is a source of wealth. And they also improved healthcare. And as I mentioned, they did create some jobs. On the failure side, however, the economic performance was disappointing. Okay? The RDP strategy was very often criticized as focusing too much on redistribution and not focusing enough on GDP growth, on economic growth. Because during the time, it was only 2 years, the period of 2 years when we used the RDP as a strategy, GDP growth was erratic. So it was fluctuating, it wasn't consistent. And as I mentioned, unemployment continued. They didn't really make a big knock in unemployment. Poverty reduction also was minimal. All right, I wouldn't say they made a significant decrease in poverty. And obviously, improved service delivery was not always successful. Even years later, we still can't say that everybody has access to clean water and sanitation. They expanded the networks, yes, but they didn't make sure that everybody had access.